Sir, we said that during the gluing we have to remove same type of vertex operators like NS and NS and then R and R.
Yes.
But because during the process of gluing we have to remove the vertex operators anyway, so it will not have any information what was there to begin with.
No, we do have, because
Okay.
the point is that if there is a Ramon vertex operator,
Yeah.
right, then you know that the fermion, that when it goes around the vertex operator, it picks a minus sign.
Yes.
Okay, because the operator product has a half kind of singularity. So even after you have removed the vertex operator, okay, that feature persists. Right? So Ramon function knows about the fact that the fermion is antiperiodic rather than periodic.
Yeah, but since we have removed the fermium anyway, so why should that information still be there?
Because imagine that we have started with an amplitude 2n formula, right? Once you have removed it, you have an amplitude 2n minus 1 formula. So that of course doesn't make sense. That means that the branch cut from one of them is entering this hole,
Yeah.
right? What we have removed, which was earlier ending here, that has been removed. So because that branch cut is still there, right? When you go around this vertex operator, you still become a minus,
Yes.
right? And so unless there is a Ramon vertex operator on the other side, there is an inconsistency.
Yes.
So basically what's happening is that the vertex operator is removed, but the branch cut is traveling through the vertex operator and going to the other side.
And it will probably end in some other vertex operator on the other side.
Exactly, that's right. Because there is no vertex operator on that side, so it will just go through.
And then,
So wherever that vertex operator that you have removed from that side was connected to, like this branch cut will go and end up there. Is this clear? That if you have two vertex operators here, suppose there is a branch cut you have taken to be connecting this, and then on the other surface it was like this. Now you remove these and remove these and glue the two. Okay. So what's going to happen is that this branch cut is now going to travel from here to here. Is this? Yeah? Yes.
Is the picture number seem to have a kind of anomaly which is kind of proportional to having a background chart for the field.
Yeah, 2 minus 2. Yes.
But the picture changing operator doesn't obviously look like something which one would have called screening operator, screening charge operator, that scalar field with the background size would have. Right.
Well, picture changing operator is like something which has this quantum numbers of equal to 5.
Yeah.
Right? Together with arbitrary number of betas and gammas. Arbitrary number of betas and gammas.
Yeah. But the usual screening operator would have been a dimension 1 operator integrated along some contour in a simple scalar field with a background chart.
Well, this is a dimension 0 operator,
This is dimension 0 operator.
which is also okay, right? I mean, you can insert in principle dimension 0 operator.
That is,
And like on the sphere, right? You can take e to the minus 2 pi. Okay, suppose I try to define this thing on a sphere, right?
yeah.
Correlation function. So there you know that you will take e to the minus 2 pi. So you can think of this as e to the minus 2 pi inserted at the infinity.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. So I was wondering whether there is an equivalent, or whether there, not equivalent, whether there exists any formulation where one actually just treats it like a screening charge operators.
But it doesn't have, it's a screening chart, but it doesn't have to be a contouring feature, right? In fact, the most natural thing to do is to insert a vertex operator. If you have any scalar field with a screening chart, right? Then you have the identity, which has dimension 0, right? And e to the power q5, or minus q5, which is dimension 0.
Yeah, which is the conjugate of that.
Yeah. And this is what we insert. You don't integrate this because this is dimension 0. Right? So in a correlation function, when you try to screen it, you just insert this operator into the correlation function. Right? And then evaluate the rest of the correlation function. Right? So that's what will give the correct result. So e to the minus 2 phi, expectation value, it will vacuum, will be non-zero. Right? That's the definition.
So in simple Coulomb gas, one would have kind of put the Dodson-Kofatio type of
Yeah, but that's just a trick. I mean, you don't have to.
Yeah,
exactly.
I was just wondering whether similar thing could be done.
Well, you can of course integrate as we did integral dw over w x sub 0, right?
Yeah, that is the closest representation to that kind of operator. But x of 0, w is actually dimension 0.
Exactly. And what the natural thing to use is the dimension 0 operator, because that's what actually, I mean, if we just put all the charge in one vertex operator, right, then that is by definition dimension 0, because it has to have a non-zero expectation value in the vacuum, right? And so one point function on the sphere is non-zero only if the operator has dimension 0. So in that sense, whenever you have a scalar with background charge, right, the natural thing that actually can soak up the charge is a dimension 0 operator. Right? And then you put rest of the vertex operators so that total charge adds up to 0. And this has other resilience. So in that sense, it's not unnatural. That I mean, even in the case of scalars, you use dimension 0 to screen. These are of course working in a different manner. Right? I mean, this picture changing operator is, I mean, uses BIST invariance and various other properties. Right? And I mean, what you insert depends on how many other vertex operators you have inserted. Because here it's not that we are demanding that every operator is dimension 0 and everything is being soaked up by one single operator. Right? In fact, every operator has dimension, not dimension, the picture number, -1 or -half. And then you insert an appropriate number of these guys to soak up the charge. Any other questions? Okay, so let me now describe the Feynman diagram description, because if last time we saw that whenever you have a plumbing fixture, okay, if you have two Riemann surface, each of which, so if you, in other words, if you have two different sections of Pg1 m1 n1 and Pg2 m2 n2, and if you do plumbing fixture, okay, you generate first of all a section, part of a section of Pg1 plus G2, n1 plus n2 minus 2, m1 plus n2, or Pg1 plus G2, n1 plus n2 and n1 plus n2 minus 2, depending on if you are doing NS or Ramon sector functions, and that amplitude, that integral over that section, okay, which will be part of the higher genus amplitude, has an interpretation in terms of Feynman diagrams, where you have a block you have two blocks connected by propagator, okay, and this propagator has a very definite expression, and if this state is phi m and phi n, that is being inserted on this, then it's phi m c L0 plus L0 bar inverse B0 B0 bar delta L0 L0 bar and C. And now I'll introduce this notation of an operator G, where G is identity for NS and I naught for. So because writing, once I write it this way, then I don't have to say give separate expressions for NS sector or Ramon sector. Okay, this G is just the abstract way of saying that it's an operator that acting on NS sector state gives identity and acting on Ramon sector state gives that is 0. And if you have type 2, in type 2, will be identity for NS when you have NS sector on the left, NS on the right. This will be chi0 for NSR, it will be chi0 bar for RNS, and chi0 bar for Ramon. So you already see that there is something strange going on here. The Drummond-Drummond sector is supposed to describe bosons. Okay? Drummond-Drummond sector is supposed to describe bosons, but nevertheless, its propagator that we are getting is not N0 plus N0 by inverse, which is just 1 over K square plus M square. This has also this extra piece, right? It's like 2 K slash plus M multiplied on top. And this has to do with the fact that Drummond-Drummond sector kinetic terms are somewhat strange. Okay, in particular, as you know, in type 2B string theory, the Drummond-Drummond 4 form has no action. Okay, and we will see that string theory is gives you a way to write down the action, but in a somewhat strange way and leads to a strange kind of problem.
You wrote down on it.
We haven't written down an action.
No, recently.
Yeah, but that uses extra things. It doesn't have a standard action. Okay, and it is motivated by string theory. Okay, there is a standard action that we can write down for type 2 supergravity. Okay, so now let me say systematically how do you go about taking all the amplitudes in string theory and give them Feynman diagram interpretation. Okay, and this will be similar to what we did for bosonic string theory. So systematic organization as Feynman diagrams. Okay. So first start with 3 punctures here. So to describe the 3 punctures here, if I use the same language that we use, this is P0, G0 and Mn with M plus N equal to 3. Its base N0, 3, this is actually 0 dimension. Okay, so it's really a point. It doesn't P0 Mn with M plus N equal to 3 so has only the vertical part. Right? The vertical part contains information about the local coordinates at the 3 punctures, okay, which of course gives infinite dimensional space, and locations of the picture changing operator. So if you are dealing with M equal to 3, N equal to 0, that means 3 NS sector states, then we have to encode information about one picture changing operator. 3 NS sector states, you have to know picture number minus 3, so you need one picture changing operator, and that information goes in the vertical direction. If it's P0, 1, 2, 1 NS sector and 2 Raman sector, okay, then you don't need any picture changing operator, because minus 1 plus minus half is minus 2, okay, so no picture changing operator is necessary. So there the fiber direction is only the local coordinates. Okay. So you pick some point along the fiber, okay, which is a section. A section in this case is just a point, okay, which means you make some choice of local coordinates at the 3 punctures and some choice of location of the picture changing operator if you need it. Okay, you don't need it for 1 NS sector and 2 Raman sector, okay, but you need it for 3 NS. Now this choice is more or less arbitrary, but you have to ensure that you maintain all the symmetries. Okay, so you pick this, but you pick this consistent with symmetries. With symmetries. Okay, which basically means that if we take, for example, the 3 NS sector and no Raman sector punctures, then it should be invariant under permutation symmetry of the 3 NS sector vertices. Right? There are SL2C transformation that permutes the 3 SL2C vertices, the 3 NS sector vertices, and under those the corresponding local coordinates must go into each other. If they don't, what you have to do is to average over those choices. Okay? It is not necessary that you have to pick one particular point on that section. Okay, what may happen is that under such permutations, this point will move to somewhere else. If it happens, you just average. Okay, that is also good enough. So this is the way you determine the three-punctured sphere. Okay, what particular section you have for the three-punctured sphere, and you assign to it a Feynman diagram to this point. Okay, you just declare that whatever amplitude you get, whatever 3-point function you get, defines a 3-point vortex for arbitrary off-shell external states. Okay, and I should have said that when you are talking about off-shell external states, we maintain the picture numbers -1 for S and -1 for unknown, but we don't restrict anything else. Okay, we take arbitrary, we don't demand them to be still invariant. We restrict, we maintain picture number, and of course you have to satisfy the L0 minus L0 bar equal to 0 constraint, right? And B0 minus B0 bar equal to 0 constraint. Exactly the same as in the case of Poisson extreme theory. Otherwise, you relax constraint on host number, every other charge possible. I mean, the full off-shell constraint fits. Okay, now given
the matter sector vertex operators would still continue to have integer dimensions, right? Integer or half integer dimensions.
well, it depends on the internal CFT. L0 minus L0 bar will still have integer or half integer, and you have to project out, throw away all the half integer. But L0 and L0 bar themselves don't have to be integers. In fact, even if you take toroidal form factorization, right? You do the I k dot x, where x is some internal coordinate. Yeah, that can have arbitrary complicated dimension depending on the radius of compactification.
That's right. But given that total dress dimension is 0.
Yeah.
And B.
No, that's not 0 anymore. For off-shell,
Okay.
it's not 0 anymore. Right? Okay. So for off-shell, it's not 0, but the difference between L0 minus L0 bar typically always takes either integer or half integer values, and you just try all the half integer values. Yeah, but L0 and L0 bar themselves are completely arbitrary.
Okay.
Because you are not demanding anymore that k square plus m square is 0 or anything. Okay, so given this, we can now construct 4 punctured spheres. Okay, a section, we can construct a section of P 0 mn with m plus n equal to 4 by Clouding fixture. Okay, so what does it mean? You take, say, 1, 2, 3, 4, and these are the external states, and you do Clouding fixture here. Or you can do, these are different configurations, 1, 3, 2, 4, 1, 4. Okay, you just consider Clouding fixture. Labeled by Q is equal to minus S minus I theta, with the restriction that S runs from 0 to infinity and theta runs from 0 to 2 pi. So this will generate part of the section of P0 or average over section, generalized section. Okay, if you have taken generalized section here, then of course when you do the Clouding fixture, you already have average over here. Okay. So you have, say, sum over average over 2 terms here, average over 2 terms here, when you glue them you will get average over 4 terms. Each of these will be average over 4 terms.
In this case, information about location of groove puncture is not there in the final.
No, it is there. Oh, yeah. In this case, of course, because the location of the about the root puncture was not part of the information about the N03, right? Because this, if you look at the N03,
It's fixed.
everything you can fix everything. So the location of the root puncture here has no meaning. Okay? That can be fixed by Z2C on this side. So this contains information about the local coordinate choices at 1, 2, 3, 4 because initially we had given the local coordinate at 1, 2, 3, 4 on all the concepts, and depending on the choice of local coordinates here, okay, of course the gluing function will be different, okay, because the gluing is always done with local coordinates. W1 W2 equal to some number. So what it generates in diagrammatic terms, okay, if you take T0 Mn, okay, again the base is M0 Mn with m plus n equal to 4. So the base now is 2-dimensional. Okay. That 2-dimensional base is generated by these two parameters, S and theta. Okay. And the S, T and U channel diagram gives you some part of the section of T0 Mn with m plus n equal to 4. Right? Because this plumbing fixture covers part of it, this covers part of it, and this covers part of it. Is this clear? But this of course is not a full amplitude. Right? Because the full amplitude should integrate over a whole section. So you basically supply the missing piece. Well, here it looks like they are disconnected, but typically you always get a connected piece that is left over. Okay, because here I have drawn everything in one dimension, right? So that's why it looks disconnected. But actually the missing piece is a connected region. And the choice here is up to you. Okay, you maintain continuity. And you have to again ensure that the choice is symmetric under the exchange of 1, 2, 3, 4. See, these three together, whatever this gives, is already consistent with the symmetry under 1, 2, 3, 4. Because we have chosen the 3-point vortices as symmetric under 1, 2, 3, right? And so once you have added these three contributions, okay, the result is automatically symmetric under the arbitrary exchange of 1, 2, 3 and 4. Okay? Because given any diagram, you can go to any other diagram by the exchange. But for these, you have to make some special effort to make sure that these are symmetric. So this we can now interpret as a Feynman diagram as follows. So the first, let's call this ABC. ABC. We have already seen that A has the interpretation of 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, namely you just take the vortex that you got from the 3-point puncture sphere calculation. You take the vortex here that you got from the 3-point sphere calculation and you join them by the propagator that I took down. Similarly, B has the interpretation of 1, 2, 1, 3, 4. B. C has the interpretation of 1, 4, 2, 3. So, and what is left is dotted contribution. Okay, that involves a 2-dimensional integral. Okay, because this is 2-dimensional. That will be clear as a 4 vortex. This is the missing piece. Okay, this is a definition of what we mean by a 4 vortex. And the important point is that when you think of this, each of these represent integration of moduli space. Right? With integration over this base. Okay? Each of these are integration over the base. But for these, you have a choice of not interpreting this as an integration over the base, but as integration over finite diagrams. Right? You take this contribution, and sum over infinite number of states in between. Okay? So you don't integrate over anything, you sum over infinite number of states. Okay? Because these are no integral, this is no integral. The advantage is that if you do it this way, then you don't have to worry about this analytic continuation. Because if you try to define this as an integral over Q, integral typically has divergences as Q goes to 0, right, or as S goes to infinity. And you have to define them analytic continuation. Right? That's the way you normally define covariance analysis. If we think of this as an infinite sum, then that analytic continuation has already been done in writing this 1 over L0 plus L01. No analytic continuation is necessary. This is a perfectly well defined object. And the price you pay is that you have to think of this as an infinite sum. Okay? But as long as you choose your vertices appropriately, this infinite sum is exponentially suppressed because there is a hidden e to the minus s naught times the dimension at the vertices. Okay, for some parameter, large parameter s, some parameter s naught that you can take to be arbitrarily large. Okay. So you can ensure that even though you have to do an infinite sum, that sum is convergent. Right? In fact, it falls off very fast and only a few terms you need typically. Okay. So this way, you can make this amplitude completely well defined. If you want to put it on a computer, you put it on a computer. Okay. This part you put it on a computer as an integral over the moduli space of 4 conjugate square, that means a 2-dimensional integral. These parts you put in as sum. So in this sense, this gives a completely well defined expression for this amplitude without having to do any analytic continuation.
If you have a technical field, you don't have any problem?
Well, at tree level, no, you don't have any problem because you will just write it as 1 over k square minus m square instead of 1 over k square plus m square. Okay. But when you try to define loops, then you'll write it properly. Okay, you'll get singularities of the kind that you cannot interpret. Okay. 1 over k square plus m square, when you try to define an Euclidean integral, right? Normally you do the big reduction and try to do the integral, right? And as long as it's 1 over k square plus m square, everything is positive definite, no singularity, you can define the integral without any problem, right? But if you have a tachyon, then the integral becomes very easy defined. But at tree level, you can in principle define without even if you have tachyons.
This is a complete off-shell stuff.
This is
complete off-shell.
well, external states you can put on shell.
No, inside.
Yeah, inside of course the k is determined by whatever momentum is flowing, and that is no reason to be on shell.
Yeah.
Right? It's like k1 plus k2.
So it's sum over all off-shell states.
Yeah, it's sum over all of shells, exactly.
But like in the bosonic case, one has to think of this as analytic continuation in the momentum space as you were.
Well, at tree level you don't have to because there is a momentum integral. But once you go to loops, you have to again think of this as Euclidean analytic continuation from the Euclidean integration. Exactly.
So that's the
Okay.
thing.
Or you give the contour. See, the analytic continuation also you can specify by giving the contour in the complex momentum plane. And then that is particularly defined. And is that you cannot take the contour on the real axis. You have to take it, eventually it has to end up at plus minus I infinity. Right? In the middle it has to wander around the complex plane. And then this process will repeat for higher part function. Okay, in fact, even to do Plumbing fixture, okay, you can do Plumbing fixture of these. So this is again a 2-parameter family, okay, Q variable, and what this generates is a section of P 1, 1. Well, 1 in n with m plus n equal to 0. Sorry, m plus n equal to 1. In fact, well, it has to be P1, 1, 0. Right? There cannot be any odd number of wrong vertex operators anywhere. Okay, P1, 1, 0. But, so this is always ns. But the thing that you are doing could be either Navier-Stokes or Raman. Right? This could be either Navier-Stokes or Raman. And those contributions are essentially sum over spin structure. Okay, so you have two contributions here, right? Navier-Stokes flowing, Raman flowing. But the Navier-Stokes flowing, you can actually think of this as a sum over two contributions, because Navier-Stokes, you have to do a GSO projection, right? Trace of 1 plus minus 1 to the f. Okay. So when a Navier-Stokes propagates, you can think of this as a trace of 1 and trace of minus 1 to the f. Okay, that means Navier-Stokes has two different contributions, Raman has two different contributions, and they together give the four different spin structures on which you have to sum. So this will then describe part of the section of P110.
You need a PCO, sorry.
In this case, well, if it's, let's see, NS Raman, you don't need a PCO. You need a PCO here.
There, yeah.
If it's Raman doing, okay, then the PCO is here.
Right.
If it's NS, then the PCO is already here, because minus 1 gives you
Already required.
minus 3, so you need a PCO.
Yeah.
Right? And then there is nothing else here. So for Raman, PCO is being an integrated PCO here. When it's NS, the PCO will be somewhere on this here. Is that clear?
Can you repeat the spin structure argument?
Yeah. So first of all, you have a sum over two terms. That's clear. Then NS
Yeah.
and Raman. Okay. Now, in principle, you can say, okay, that's all you have. You have sum over two terms. Okay. But normally, when you take a genus 1 amplitude and you think of sum over spin structures, you have a sum over four terms. Right? So I was trying to explain how the sum over four terms come about. And the way it comes about is because when you take trace, you are summing over all possible states, right? Sum over NS sector states. Okay, let me write the sum over NS sector states. What you can choose to do is to not restrict to only the GSO even states. See, in string field theory, you don't even talk about GSO odd states, right? They are not even part of the spectrum. The optional fields are all GSO even. Okay, so you'll never worry about GSO odd states. But when you try to make connection with the RNS Polyaka formulation, okay, you can choose to say that this sum over NS in string field theory, you will write it as a sum over two terms, okay, as sum over NS plus and NS minus, which means not just the GSO even states, also the GSO odd states, okay, the full sum, but you will insert in the trace a 1 plus minus 1 to the f. Okay, my minus 1 to the f is this is the Warship formula. Okay. So this implements the GSO projection. That's if you make an unrestricted sum for all NS sector states without worrying about GSO. Okay. And insert this in the trace in the as an operator in the sum. Then that basically does the job that you are supposed to do, which is sum over GSO even states only. Okay. And now I am saying that this sum you can interpret as a sum of two terms of two different states.
So both the NS term and the R term, they both account for two spin structures.
Exactly. Okay. So NS term corresponds to periodic boundary condition, anti-periodic boundary condition on this cycle. And then 1 and minus 1 to the f is periodic and anti-periodic boundary condition on these cycles. So similarly, when R state is propagating, right, Raman state means it's a periodic boundary condition on this cycle, right, because what is propagating here has periodic boundary condition. But in this cycle, the fact that you are summing over periodic and anti-periodic is again coming from these two terms over here. Okay, insertion of minus 1 to the f corresponds to periodic boundary condition on this cycle. Insertion of 1 corresponds to anti-periodic boundary condition on this cycle. Then that's the way. If you start with the string field theory diagram and if you go to try to interpret it in terms of the worldsheet diagram, that's the way the worldsheet diagram will emerge. The sum over spin structure on the worldsheet will emerge. Is this clear? Okay, so as I was saying, it will cover part of this, and whatever is not covered, you declare as a new contribution, which is the 1 point function. Of this. And this means that next time when you try to construct higher order vortex, you have to look at a Feynman diagram and draw a corresponding worldsheet diagram, right? I mean, here, for example, the fact that you have to sum over these possibilities, right? You could have guessed from these diagrams. Of course, independently, you know that Plumbing fixture will give you these. So let me go one more step and then it will become clear. And again, I should say that this one, the definition of the 1 point function, has no divergence at all. Right? It has no divergence because the divergent part, which is coming from the tau goes to I infinity, that's the boundary of the moduli space. That's included here. Okay, then S goes to infinity limit of this property is the tau goes to I infinity, where all possible divergences come from. So this is divergent, but that divergence you don't see directly because you have replaced this by 1 over k square plus m square and a sum. And this is perfectly finite. Okay, this you can interpret as just an order integral over moduli space of genus 1 Riemann surface, except the tau integral doesn't run all the way to I infinity. Okay, where the divergences should come from.
Divergence are the ends of the two curves, right? The end of the curve is the two.
Divergence is somewhere, well, the way I have defined it, it's divergence is, this is the part that is covered by this. Right? Dotted curves are outside.
So the ends are G.
Well, it depends on, no, not the ends. Ends are actually finite. These are the S equal to 0 ends. The S equal to infinity end is somewhere here. Because at S equal to 0 end, right, you stop and then you have to fill the rest by explicitly putting in the vortex. So divergence is somewhere in between, the S equal to 0, right, which is sitting somewhere here.
But in principle, these bold lines you could make arbitrarily small. I mean, if you because you want to just get
Exactly.
some part.
Yeah. So you can make it arbitrarily small, and the way you do it is by using this S naught, okay, that I introduced, or by descaling the local coordinates, so that when you glue, the diagrams like this, for example, will cover very little of the moduli space. It's only the other boundary. Right? So that way, most of the contribution, right, will come from the elementary vortices. Right? The integration goes almost near the boundary, but the contribution near the boundary, okay, you reinterpret as finite. And that's the most efficient way to organize this. Because the worldsheet diagrams do very well, right, except when you are at the boundary. Right? So you don't want to go to the boundary using worldsheet diagram. And the Feynman diagrams do very well precisely near the boundary. Right? Because then near the boundary, the sum over n, okay, gets falls off very fast. Right? Because you have effectively n to the minus s naught times the L0 plus L0 part. Right? We don't see it explicitly, but it's there in the part as part of the vortex. And that falls off very fast. So the sum is very highly convergent. Right? Except for the massless states which cause a divergence. Well, except for massless states, the on-shell states. Okay, basically it's the on-shell states which give divergence. Everything else falls off very fast. Okay, so let me go one step higher. So suppose we are looking at genus 2, 2-point function.
Yeah. Some kind of string coupling counting parameters sitting around with that cross. Order GS.
Yeah, so basically, whenever there is genus 1 genus G contribution, there will be a GS square multiplying it. Right? You can see it in terms of string field theory. but you can also see it here. So you can think of the original 3-punctured sphere as having something like 1 over gs square. And each plumbing fixture supplying a gs square, right? Propagator gets gs square, and then the counting automatically gives.
Yeah, but like while drawing the diagram, if one writes this, one should add immediately a j squared to that.
Yeah, you can do that, or at the end, you look at the genus of the surface and you put a gs square. But I am just saying that if you want to see how it comes from string field theory, right? What you can say that you draw you start with this thing as the 3-point vortex goes as gs square, 1 over gs square,
And every propagator is j squared.
and every propagator gives you gs square. Okay, and then you can already see that when you have glued 2 3-point function to get a 4-point function at tree level, it comes with a 1 over gs square. Right? 1 over gs square, 1 over gs square comes gs square. So whenever you fill, that will also carry 1 over gs square. Right? So this way all 3 amplitudes will carry 1 over gs square. The loop amplitude here, you have a 1 over gs square to begin with, but this has a gs square. And so that basically kills the gs square, it's a border 1. So whatever you used to kill must also carry no power of gs. Right? So in a sense, once the 3-point function has been normalized and the propagator has been normalized correctly, you automatically get all the gs square factors in all the amplitudes.
Just diagrammatically, just to keep the mnemonic, one should just say j squared for this propagator ending on a cross. Right? This intrinsic.
Yeah, so these are, well, this is in fact not j square, these are order 1. Because tree level you have taken j square, right? Yeah, 1 over j square.
Yeah, with respect to the.
Yeah, with respect to that, it will be j square, yes, that's right. Okay, so genus to 2-point function, right?
So if we had computed a 2-point function in the torus while translating.
That's what you're doing, yes. Go ahead. So you can ask when we do that 2-point function on the torus. So to organize this, it's best to draw the Feynman diagrams. Okay, what kind of Feynman diagrams will give you? A one loop to one. Yes.
Does the fact that we can make this region which is covered by these 3 diagrams arbitrarily small?
Yes.
Does this mean that
By this, well, you don't want to make, yeah, but
there is an
yes.
ambiguity between, the region covered by one PI diagram
Yeah.
and one PR diagram?
Yeah, so this ambiguity, what one can show, eventually translates to, so these are just different choice of section, right? These will require one kind of choice of local coordinates, right? If you want to make, change the size, right? You do it by basically changing your choice of local coordinates on the original 3-punctured sphere. Okay? So you are changing the section, right? There are different possible sections that you can use for defining string field theory vortices. Okay? And what one can show is that these different choices of sections are actually related by field definition. So when you actually write down the string field theory action, right, you can show that changing the section can be implemented by making a field definition of the fields. And that makes it explicit that the final results, all physical results are independent of how you choose the section. Okay. But once you have made a particular choice of section for the 3-punctured sphere, the 4-punctured sphere is not completely arbitrary. Okay, because for these regions, you cannot change these sections anymore. Right? So once the 3-punctured sphere section has been chosen. And for these, inside it's arbitrary, but you have to make sure that the boundaries are match. Yeah, you cannot start from here, for example. It has to be smoothly connected. So there is a lot of ambiguity in the choice of sections, but it's not free for all. You cannot choose completely arbitrarily the section for 3-punctured sphere and section for 4-punctured sphere. Okay, because already 3-punctured sphere choice fixes these parts. Okay, so genus to 2-point function. Okay. So what you have to do, if you want to keep track of the counting, make sure that you have gotten all the plumbing sets correctly, you will first draw all possible Feynman diagrams that could come from genus to 2-point function. Okay. see what is covered, okay, which region is covered, and whatever is not covered, you declare as an explicit two-point vortex that you have to add a genus to. Sorry, genus 1 two-point function. This is what I want. This is what you asked, right? Torus two-point function. Genus 1 two-point function. So let's start with the Feynman diagram. So first we have this. Right, one loop, two-point function. Then we have added a 4-point vortex, if you remember.
From here, so the coupling at 3-point function that would be fixed. I mean, in the sphere level, we have like 1 by gs square.
Yes.
This thing. So which means that at the 3-point this thing vertex, we should have a 1 by gs.
1 over gs square.
Yeah, at each 1 over gs. So
No, what at each this thing 1 over gs square. Because I have taken this to be 1 over gs square, right? This 3-point vortex. See, you think of the action being multiplied by 1 over gs square. Right? If the action is multiplied by 1 over gs square, then all vortices are multiplied by 1 over gs square.
okay, yeah.
Right? So if this is 1 over gs square, this is the same vortex. Right? This is 1 over gs square. Okay, this is 1 over gs square. And the propagator is gs square. Right? Because the propagator is the inverse of the kinetic term. So this is the easiest to normalize. Okay? Just multiply the whole action by 1 over gs square. The propagator is the inverse of the kinetic term, that goes as gs square. So this whole product is 1 over gs square, 1 over gs square times gs square. So it will still be 1 over gs square. Okay, so these two, but we also have this one, because we have also added one more function. Okay. So what are the corresponding plumbing fixtures? So this one, so 2 3-punctured spheres. Basically, consider plumbing fixture of this. So there is a parameter Q1 here and the parameter Q2 here. Right? 3-punctured spheres themselves have no parameters, so we will have basically 2 complex parameters, so 4 real parameters. That's the correct moduli space. Correct dimension of the moduli space for a genus 1 2-point function. Right? Because the tau parameter of the torus is one of them. And 2-point function, but because of the transition symmetry of the torus, 1 point can be fixed at anywhere. The other coordinate is a complex parameter. So 2 parameters, tau and z. Okay? Q1 and Q2 basically reflect those 2 parameters. This one is you start with the elementary vortex, because 4-point function is an elementary vortex now, right? Whatever was not covered, these parts describe some 4-punctured sphere. Integration of part of the moduli, part of the section. And you do plumbing fixture of these. Finally, this vortex is part of 1-punctured torus. Right? Because we define this one as whatever was not covered by this diagram. Okay? So that's the 1-point function on the torus, this vortex. And this vortex is a 3-punctured sphere. And the propagator is like doing plumbing fixture. Is this clear?
if we had considered higher point functions, we would also get higher point vertices. Those may also contribute to this.
Which high point vertices?
The sphere.
No, high point vertices you can easily check if you have start 5-point function, right? If you start doing, right, you will either get more genus or more than 2 points on the torus. Right? So higher point functions will not contribute, but if you want to go to higher genus or higher point function, if you want to calculate the genus 1 3-point function, then the 5-point function will contribute. So the idea is that these diagrams cover part of P1 Mn with m plus n equal to 2. There are 3 independent regions, 1, 2, 3, and then whatever is not covered, you add an explicit 2-point function. That is this integral, dotted region integral, you declare as a 2-point function. Explicit 2-point vertex, that is added at genus 1.
So for higher genus or higher point functions, that will be considered as a fundamental object, but
Yeah,
torus with 2 functions.
torus with 2 functions, exactly. Right? So this will be a torus with 2 functions integrated over a certain region, certain 4-dimensional subspace, okay, which are these dotted lines. But again, the important point is that these dotted lines will not include any degeneration. Okay, all degenerate tori, right, all possible degenerations are already included in these. For example, let's look at this. Right? What this represents a degenerate. So this includes a degenerate region, but this line becomes infinitely long. Right? S goes to infinity region. Okay. So what is that degeneration? Okay, on a torus, which 2 punctures. Okay, in the usual description, what is the degeneration S goes to infinity? This is a degeneration where these 2 points are conformally close compared to the rest of the torus. Okay. So this is a degeneration, but in the usual language, it will correspond to these 2 points coming together. Yeah, we are integrating over the location of this point. This is when these 2 points are coming close together. Right? That's this degeneration. This one, okay, when this length goes to infinity, that's like the tau parameter of a torus going to infinity. And this includes both. Okay, depends on how you take the length. That is Q1 and Q2. So you can take Q2 fixed, take Q1 to infinity, or Q1 fixed, take Q2 to infinity, or both Q1 and Q2 to infinity. And those cover various degenerate regions. But the main point is that together all these diagrams cover the full set of degenerate regions. Once you have removed these regions from the domain, these dotted regions which are left over are completely finite.
So this first one will also correspond to tau going to I infinity.
Yeah, the first one will also correspond to tau goes to I infinity, part of that region. Exactly. And this way you can just keep building. Okay, you will draw your Feynman diagrams. Okay, that covers part of the corresponding PGMN, and whatever is left, you declare as a new vertex that you have to add to that order. And when you go to higher order, you will use that new vertex also as part of the Feynman diagram, and do Clamel picture of those new vertices.
And the dotted region is here also connected region.
Yes, typically, well, I don't know whether there is general proof, but my experience the dotted region is always connected. But it actually doesn't matter. If it's not connected, it's a sum over these different regions. Any questions? Okay, so now let me describe some of the uses of this formalism. The first one I have already said that once you have this partitioning of the moduli space, that you treat different regions of the moduli space differently. The regions near the boundary you interpret as Feynman diagrams. The regions near the in the interior, you just think of this as a worldsheet diagram integrated over the moduli space. Then all the divergences are under control. Right? You can put it on the computer and the computer can evaluate. Right? Computer doesn't have to be told what to do, analytic continuation and so on. But a more serious use is when the usual methods, even using analytic continuation, simply fails. Okay, and that so let me describe some of that.
So one question.
Yes.
So for example, this will be a mass term, right? A quadratic term, this 2-point function.
Yeah, this will be a more fast term.
So similarly at higher orders also, when I look at 2-point functions, correspondingly at the field theory Lagrangian, I have to add new contributions to the mass term.
That's quadratic term.
Yeah, so that sum would convert.
Well, it's an expansion in powers of G string, right?
Okay.
So in perturbation theory, you always think of this as an expansion in powers of G string, and you always try to take even order in G string. Okay, so consider the following diagram: 2-point function on some genus 3 set. Okay, some on-shell state. Okay, I'm first describing how to do in the usual approach. Some on-shell state which satisfies k square plus m square equal to 0. And you integrate over the moduli space of this. And during that integration, you will encounter degenerate regions of the following kind. Okay, when the parameter, this S parameter goes to infinity and this S parameter goes to infinity, these are degenerate regions. Some handles are becoming infinitely long. Okay, they are supposed to integrate. In the usual Polyakov approach, they are supposed to integrate over these modular parameters. And normally you would think, at least at T level, what happens is that you can define this by analytic continuation. Okay? It's not very useful to put it on the computer, but at least you can do analytic continuation. Right? That's the way one defines covariance and amplitude. But here, it's impossible to do analytic continuation. And the way you can see that it's impossible to do analytic continuation, okay, and get a finite result is to see physically what we expect for that. Right? What is the divergence telling us? So this divergence in this case is like u minus s k square plus n square. Then integral ds. I mean you have integration over s. And normally in field theory, if you want to field theory interpretation, you will write as 1 over k square plus n square. Okay. In string theory, when you do analytic continuation, basically you are replacing it by 1 over k square plus n square. And field theory essentially is doing what analytic continuation would normally tell you. But this is of course 0, right? K square plus m square is 0 because external state is on-shell. So even in field theory, this 1 over k square plus m square is 0, which means that even if you do analytic continuation, you will find that you are actually sitting on top of a pole. Okay, you really have a 1 over 0. Okay. And you don't see that you are sitting on top of a pole because in a conventional Polyakov formulation, you cannot go away from k square plus n square equal to 0, right? To see that you are on top of a pole, you have to actually take the variable of the pole and then approach the pole as a limit, right? Then only you will see that it's like actually a pole, right? Here you will just see an infinity and there is no you can resolve what to do with that infinity, right? If you just naively carry out integration over the Walsh variables. Is this clear? Okay, so you basically run into the usual 2-point function on a genus G1 surface. You will encounter divergences, and there is no analytic continuation that can help you in resolving the divergences. Okay, you can see it physically because what we are having is 1 over k square plus m square, where k square plus m square equal to 0. Is this point clear? But now we see that once you think of this as a field theory Feynman diagram, it is clear what we are supposed to do. Okay? Because these are nothing but self-energy diagrams. Okay? These are diagrams of this kind. Okay, I am writing this as a blob. This blob in terms of field theory may contain some over various diagrams, okay, which we don't here, but it's blobs like this. And you know that in field theory you are not supposed to deal with this blob in isolation. Right? If you deal with it in isolation, you will get 1 over k square plus m square at k square plus m square equal to 0. So what you have to do is to resum the this is what we call self-energy diagrams. And once you have the Feynman diagram interpretation, it's also clear what you should resum. Because we have made a clear distinction between diagrams like these. Okay, once you have Feynman diagram interpretation, right? These are quite distinct. This, for example, is distinct from a higher genus contribution of this kind. Suppose this is p equal to 1. In the normal approach, okay, a genus 2-point function like this, there is no clear division between what is coming from 2 genus 1 grouped together and what is coming from the genus 2 block. But once we have done a field theory, okay, given the Feynman diagram interpretation, then this diagram is distinct from this one. Okay? There are 2 separate contributions. And it's clear what you have to, how you should resum. Right? So this will be given by k square plus n square minus this blob inverse. Okay, and this blob will now contain genus 1 contribution, genus 2 contribution, genus 3 contribution, and so on. Is this clear? Okay, so in other words, what I am saying is that once you have a Feynman diagram interpretation, you can do exactly what you do in normal field theory to deal with divergent situations like this. So this is in some sense your resummed or renormalized propagator. Okay, there is no infinite renormalization, these are all finite expressions. And then you will say that the 0 of this is the location of the new pole. Right? The mass is renormalized. Okay, this may not have 0 at k square plus m square equal to 0, but this will have 0 at k square plus m square plus some delta m square equal to 0. And that is your definition of a renormalized mass. Is this clear? And so once you accept that the diagram, the contribution can be arranged as sum over Feynman diagram, then this is automatic. Okay? Sum over Feynman diagrams, you just, these are one particle irreducible diagrams. Okay? Once you have Feynman diagram interpretation, then of course one particle irreducible is distinct from one particle reducible diagram. So just sum over all, these are one particle irreducible blocks. You sum over them and we write it this way. But of course you have to remember that the definition of this, definition of what this blob means, depends on the choice of local coordinates. Yeah, there is an invariant definition of what this one particle irreducible blob is, right? Because that depends on how you have chosen a local coordinate to begin with. Okay, so this object is not unambiguous. But the physical question is the location of the pole unambiguous? Right? Because that's what you want to know. Right? Because if that becomes ambiguous, then of course what you are doing has no sense. And what one can show is that indeed that is unambiguous. So the location of the physical pole is unambiguous. If you do this, the kind of approach that I have described so far, proving that the location of the pole is unambiguous is a big headache. Okay, because you really have to do a lot of work to show that as you change the section, even though this amplitude changes, the pole position remains the same. But once we have reinterpreted this as a genuine string field theory diagrams, okay, once you have written an action, then it follows automatically from the fact that change of local coordinates is a field redefinition. And you know that the field redefinition in a quantum field theory doesn't change the location of the poles. Okay, that's a much simpler proof that these things are independent of the choice of local coordinates. But even without writing down an action for string field theory, okay, just from the diagrammatic structure, you can first of all find an expression for this, okay, and then you can do it somewhat, show it somewhat, that indeed the location of the pole is independent of the choice of section. Are there other questions?
Sir, can you repeat again that summing this way,
Yes.
and when we get the result, and then we can say that okay, it is not, ambiguous. I mean, it does not change. Sorry.
The propagator actually is ambiguous. This object is ambiguous,
Yeah.
but the pole position is
Yeah.
unambiguous.
Yes. Yes.
Right? In fact, even there, the reason that the direct analysis is difficult is because not all pole positions are unambiguous. Because in string theory, you know that at any given level, there are various unphysical and pure gauge states. Okay? So, what you consider only the physical poles are unambiguous. Right? The unphysical and pure gauge states, their poles are actually ambiguous. They change as you change the local coordinates.
Yeah. So, and what was the easier argument that you gave?
Thus, when you write it as a field theory action,
Okay.
right, gauge independent field theory action, there you can show that changing the section, changing the choice of local coordinates is a field redefinition.
Okay.
Right? And once you have established that it's a field redefinition, right, then you know in quantum field theory, field redefinition doesn't change the location of the pole. Right? The physical masses are all unchanged. So that's the easier argument. Yeah, in fact, since I am discussing field redefinition, I can also mention another usefulness of this, which is even for standard on-shell amplitudes. Right? Forget about off-shell amplitude, just standard on-shell amplitude where there is a mass accumulation and so on. We gave a general proof that the amplitude is independent of a choice of section, okay, using this relation, right? D omega p equal to minus 1, omega p of QB okay, using this we showed that the on-shell amplitudes are independent of choice of section. But there is a if that it's independent of a choice of section up to boundary terms. And to actually show that these boundary terms are zero is in fact a big headache. Okay, the point is in simple string theory it is possible to prove this with a lot of work because you have to classify all possible operators that could contribute to the boundary term and argue one by one that these operators don't contribute to the boundary term. Okay, and in fact for the most general version of string theory where the CFT is arbitrary, it has now been proved that the boundary terms all vanish. But once you use the language of string field theory, then it's automatic that it should be independent of the class of section. Again, by the same argument that in the language of string field theory, changing the section corresponds to field redefinition, and you know that field redefinition doesn't change the S matrix. Right? So the on-cell amplitude should be completely independent of the choice of section. And you can also see where the difficulties are. Right? The particular difficulty that arises in showing the sum of the boundary terms at 0, in fact, shows up in the corresponding description using string field theory as explicit boundary terms that are carried in a partition. Okay, because if you follow the rules of string field theory, then you find that in certain cases, the usual on-cell procedure has to be supplemented by adding explicit boundary terms. Okay, and once you do that, then the independence of the choice of local coordinates is automatic.
It's like Gibbon-Hocking term.
Pardon?
It's like Gibbon-Hocking term.
No, it's not Gibbon-Hocking. It's just that you are integrating over the moduli space. Right? It is not the usual space time at all. This is boundary of the moduli space. Right? So when there is factorization, right, you can show that in some cases you have to add some explicit contribution associated with the factorization. The certain boundary contributions, boundary term propagating in the intermediate state doesn't vanish. And string field theory automatically comes with a procedure for what you are supposed to do, even without talking about boundary terms. Right? String field theory gives you a calculated amplitude. Right? And as part of that procedure, you find that there are certain things you have to add in while calculating the amplitude. Don't see in the standard Collier formulation. If you use the optimal vertex operator, then this problem is not there. When you use the vertex operator of the form C, C bar times dimension appropriate primary, then these boundary terms are not there. But for general vertex operators of the form Q B lambda, right, which are also BRST invariant but not these conformal kind, okay, you have to add extra terms which are given by string field theory. Okay, so we'll probably discuss it when we discuss the string field theory explicitly. But for now, all I'm trying to say is that this problem of showing that the boundary terms are 0, okay, which is a very complicated problem in the usual approach, is completely bypassed in using string field theory by showing that it's a field definition, changing the section. Okay, and then if you want, you can go back and trace where the difficulties were here, okay, and see how string field theory resolves this. Okay, so there are another application, okay, which is the question that came up, whether you could take the vertex operators, whether you can avoid using picture changing operators, and just take the vertex operators in some other picture, okay, in appropriate picture, so that total picture number always adds up to the correct value. So let's take a specific example. Suppose you are calculating genus 0 4-point function. So you take genus 0 4-point function. So the correct procedure is to take 4-point function of n estimates. The correct procedure is to take the vertex operators in the 1, 2, 3, 4, all in minus 1. So let me write this as 1 in minus 1, 2 in minus 1, 4 in minus 1, and 3 in minus 1. Okay, the subscript basically reflects the picture number that you are going to use. And then you have to put 2 PCOs, which are denoted by these circles. Okay? Now, simplified procedure would be say to take one in 0 picture, 2 in 0 picture, 3 in -1, and 4 in -1. Yeah, you just change 2 of the vertices into picture number -1, so picture number 0. Okay, so change to picture number 0, let me say what the operation is. Okay. So V0 is basically x of z, v of -1, W, so V0 of W is limit of z goes to W of x of z v minus 1 W. Okay, that's the definition of how you check picture. So suppose you have done that. Okay, 1 and 2 in the 0 picture and 3 and 4 in the -1 picture. Okay, and now I'll see where the reference is.
This is I think.
This is chi x. What about the capital X? Till I am talking about explicit CFT operators, capital X and capital chi x. Now let's consider generation. Degeneration. Where 1 and 2 are come together. Okay, which is also equivalent to 3 and 4 coming together. So then if you follow the strict field theory prescription, what you are supposed to do is to take 1 minus 1, 2 minus 1, and then one picture changing operator here, and glue 3 minus 1, 4 minus 1 with one picture changing operator here. Because you are gluing a 3-point vertex, this is also NSA, right? So minus 1, minus 1, minus 1, so you need a 1 PCO here. And minus 1, minus 1, minus 1, you need 1 PCO here. So the intuition from string field theory is telling us that in the degeneration limit, okay, you don't need to use string field theory. Okay? Suppose you are interested on your own cell amplitudes. Nevertheless, string field theory intuition tells us that in this degeneration limit, we must adjust the locations of the picture changing operators so that one becomes close to 1 and 2, so the other one remains finite distance away from 1 and 2, right, which is conformally equivalent to being close to 3 and 4.
Well, you are saying that both the PCOs cannot be on one side.
That's wrong degeneration, because then what is going to flow through this is a 0 picture, right? Okay, suppose this is 1 minus 1, 2 minus 1 and minus 1. Okay? And now you put the other PCO also on this. Okay? Then you have to insert here a factor of e to the 2 5. Right? Because there is minus 4 total picture number minus 4 has accumulated here, right? You have to put e to the 2 5, whose conjugate is the vacuum, which is picture number 0. Okay? The picture number 0 state will propagate through this. That's not a right description.
What if at these two ends the Navier-Stokes operators were in picture number 0 rather than minus 1 and the two PCOs removed from either sphere?
Picture number 0?
Here and here, I mean, these two bunches. Suppose
Yes, so that is this simplified picture, right?
this one, actually, suppose we remove the two PCOs
Yes.
and at the two bunches you have NS operators. And then
Yeah, so now once you have this picture, right, then you can take this here, you can convert to 0 picture.
So, on the other side, suppose I put it at the bunch.
At the path here.
No,
Here.
before you did plumbing fixture, suppose that one was in the zero picture.
That's the wrong procedure. Because the propagator, whatever is flowing in this limit, right, should be the minus 1 picture.
Why is that? I mean, that is-
Because that's what follows from string field theory, right?
Oh, I see. So that you have not proved, but that is independent statement.
Well, if you use string field theory, right, all states are in minus 1 picture, right? So the propagator that will yield is only from a minus 1 picture. See, if you say that string field theory vortex, these 3-point vortex that I introduced, right? Okay, I only have minus 1 picture here, right? So the propagator that I am using here is only for minus 1 picture vortex operator. See, in string field theory, you have to make a choice of how you define your off-shell states, right? I already told you shouldn't have off-shell states for every picture number because that will be like counting too many. You have to make a choice, right? And a natural choice, which is consistent with gauge impedance and everything else, is that it's in a minus 1 picture. So you fix that once and for all. So all propagation is in minus 1 picture for the NS sector, and for the Raman sector is a minus half picture which propagates because that's what we have chosen to be the string field. And once you have made that, string field theory rule tells us that through this only the minus 1 picture has to propagate, right? And that's also consistent with the fact that we are doing two 3-point vortices, right? Each 3-point vortex by definition contains a picture number, a picture changing operator, right? So there is no ambiguity here. Once you think of this as string field theory Feynman diagram, this is what we end up with, right? You cannot change this.
But then you are saying one can move the two PCOs to two of the vertex operators, and you get what you call a simplified picture.
No, you will not get what. So simplified picture, you will get. I'll tell you what you get from simplified picture. In this case, if you try to take 1 goes to 2.
Sorry, I didn't mean that. I mean, here 1 and 2 are in the
Zero picture.
So here, suppose like that will be 1 and 3 would be zero picture.
Yes, that's right, exactly. So let's do this. So here, if you do this factorization, so that's like 1, 0, 2, 0. Right? You have a plumbing fixture with something else. 3 minus 1, 4 minus 1. No PCO. But this effectively means that you have, in the degeneration limit, you have put both PCOs here. Right? Which is of course the wrong choice. Yeah, that's not what string field theory tells us. I mean, sometimes you may be lucky and this contribution may agree with that. But there is no guarantee that it will agree. And there are examples where it fails. Now, of course, you could have said that, okay, if you had taken 1, 0, 2 minus 1, then it would work. Okay? 1, 0, 2 minus 1 will work. But 1, 0, 2 minus 1, if you take 3, 0, 4 minus 1, then 1 and 3, when you bring close, then again you are in trouble, right?
So basically, for example, in the so-called simplified picture, when calculating the square language has no problem. The issue is in the degeneration limits, you must move around the PCOs to different locations.
Exactly.
So,
Right?
but-
Which basically means that when you integrate over the modularized case, right, you cannot stick to this assignment all the time. Right?
So
At some point after the modularized case, you have to move the PCO from one to the other.
So in other words, as is in the literature, I mean, this is the kind of choice that's often made. So that's correct, but when you go to the various boundary contributions, you have to be careful where
Exactly.
you have to move around the PCOs.
Yeah, exactly. Right? So, I mean, if you just take this and try to do the calculation, sometimes you may run into actually wrong answer. Okay, there are examples.
The boundary contributions you get non-physical states in the tube, is it?
Exactly, right? So in fact, I mean, often, okay, in such cases where what happens is that the simplified picture gives you 0. Okay, whereas the actual answer is not 0. Okay, it's something non-zero. And the easiest way to calculate the actual answer is to calculate the difference between this and that. Okay, because the difference between this and that will involve that as you are going to the boundary, you have to move all of the PCOs from here to here. Okay, but that's a total derivative. Movement of the PCOs is a total derivative. Right? So the difference between this and that one, you can express as a total derivative. Right? And that is given in terms of the boundary contribution. So while these are useful, this simplified picture is useful because it gives the wrong answer and then you can calculate the difference to find the right answer. But if you just trust the simplified picture and do the calculation with this, you will not get the right answer.
I'm just asking because in the literature, I mean, when a 4-point function, often people do this, say 2 are 0 pictures, 2 are -1 pictures. So,
Yeah, so a generic momentum, is not a problem. Because a generic momentum, what happens is that the boundary terms that you will get vanishes by analytic conjugation. Right? So that's why what people do in the literature at generic momentum is okay. Right? But when you are trying to do it at say zero momentum, so spatial momentum, right? Where you want to study some special properties of the vacuum, then you run into problems.
So basically saying that, I mean, they just have the correct number of PCOs essentially wherever you want, but in the various degeneration limits, be careful about
Where the PCOs are,
So is others with various factorizations you have to be careful in those limits.
Exactly. That in all degeneration limits, you have to make sure that what is propagated here is the appropriate vortex of particle, -1 picture vortex of particle. For the NS sector, and from the Raman sector, it's -1.
So this is integral, in integrand over this z is fine, the dz's. But basically you are saying the degeneration you have to move around the PCO
Exactly.
depending on what you do.
Exactly. Depending on what degeneration you are using. Right? Then you shouldn't, for example, take two zero picture vortex of particles towards each other. Right? A zero picture and a -1 picture is okay. Okay, because that has the right PCO. You cannot just take two -1 picture vortex of particles to each other. You also have to bring a PCO close to it. Yeah, because if you take two -1 picture vortex of particles towards each other, that's like having this picture without any PCO on this. Yeah, that you shouldn't do.
So here, for example, if I want to bring 1, 2 together, I should bring one of the PCOs from 3 or 4 to one of those.
Exactly. That's it. Okay, even here, when you bring -1, these two together, right, one of the PCOs must also come close. And only then this degeneration, this picture is valid. Okay, maybe I'll just mention one more thing, okay, and then this chapter will be closed. And from next time I can start with the singularities. Okay. And this is about the Raman sector propagator. Okay. Let me just so let me remind you that the Raman sector propagator we have found something like this. Phi MC B0 bar and these are in the -3 harmonics. So when it's part of a tree, then of course the host numbers of these are fixed. Right? When it's part of a tree, the host number of this is fixed by the host number of the external space. Because that is the host number concentration. But when it's part of a loop, then you have to sum over all possible host numbers. And imagine that it's part of a
So can you repeat what you said?
yeah, I'm just wait. So I'm saying that if you take this Raman sector propagator, okay, normally it will appear inside the Feynman diagrams, right? In the various Feynman diagrams they will draw you have to use this form. Okay, here for example, if it's here it's NS, but if it has Raman, this is what you will use. But if this is tree diagram, then this is always picture number -3 and the host number of this is fixed by the host numbers of the external states. Right? Where the host number concentration, so it will be just sum of the host numbers of these that will flow here. So the host number is not arbitrary. Okay, it's a fixed host number. But when it's part of a loop like this, okay, then you are summing over all possible states propagating in the loop. Then the host number is not fixed. You have to sum over all possible host numbers. And when we try to sum out all possible ghost numbers, then we can, in principle, run into the problem that we had mentioned earlier, that there is infinite degeneracy in picture number -3. And in fact, there is infinite degeneracy both in picture number -half and picture number -3. The spectrum is bounded from below, but there is infinite degeneracy, and the degeneracy comes from the fact that beta naught to the n on -3 picture vacuum is non-zero for all n. So you try to take the trace, you can keep applying beta naught to the n, okay, and get newer and newer states which all have the same L0 value. Okay, and it's propagating in the state. And naively you might think that this will make the sum diverge, right? This will make the trace diverge because you have infinite number of states of a given mass square propagating in the loop. Is this point clear? However, it turns out that is not the case. And the reason is the following. So this is -3 picture. Okay. Now, let's see what will happen when chi naught acts on this. Okay. So take beta naught to the n on -3 and apply chi naught. So chi naught doesn't change the level, right? It's convolution L0, but it changes the picture number. Okay. So this is the state of picture number -1. Picture number -half. Now, on a picture number -half state, also there is infinite degeneracy. Okay? And that infinite degeneracy is created by gamma 0 to the n. Okay, because gamma 0 doesn't annihilate -half picture vacuum. Okay, beta 0 doesn't annihilate -3 picture vacuum. Now, let's imagine that you have created a state of very high beta 0. Okay, a lot of beta 0s are being applied on this -3 picture vacuum. Okay. That's a highly negative ghost number, and you apply chi 0 on it. So it's a state of very high, large negative ghost number in picture number -half. Is that clear? Beta 0 creates negative ghost number, right? Because you are applying beta 0. So this gives a state of very high negative ghost number of picture number -half. But such states don't exist. This is starting from picture number -half. You can create states with very high positive ghost number, right? But not high negative ghost number. Which basically means that for sufficiently large n, this must vanish because there is a candidate state.
Only -half is the only thing that it could have.
Well, you can have a few beta zeros, but it's not always on the vacuum. Yeah, if it's on the vacuum, only one you can have. But typically it's -3 and then there's several other things applied to it. Right? But that's a finite set, right? Because other things will increase the L0 eigenvalue.
Given number of vertex operators.
Yeah, given our vertex of order or the finite L0 eigenvalue. Right? But whatever you do now, as you keep on applying beta 0 to the n, right? If you take n to be very large, right, it will drive the ghost number to a very large negative. And once you apply chi 0 on it, you find that there is simply no state of that large negative ghost number in the spectrum. Okay, because on -half, you cannot create states with arbitrarily large negative ghost number. Okay, so at every level you will find that this has to stop. Okay, even though naively it looks like that you can create arbitrarily high negative ghost number state of the same L0 eigenvalue. What actually propagates, what actually contributes in this propagate is only a finite number of states. And that's why even though naively the Ramon sector has infinite number of states which could propagate, it doesn't cause any divergence.
The states, even the physical states.
No, arbitrary offset states. Take an arbitrary offset state propagating. Right? Take this one can be an arbitrary offset state of certain L0 eigenvalue. Right? Now, given that you keep applying beta 0 to create more and more L0 eigenvalue, more and more states of the same L0 eigenvalue, but more and more negative host number. Right? I am not assuming anywhere that this is an on-shell state. Okay, you can apply some arbitrary offset operator over here. But the point is that whatever this operator is a fixed operator. If you apply a very, very large number of beta zeros, right, to create arbitrary negative, large negative host number state, at some point it will become such a negative host number that there is no such state in the minus of picture.
How does one know that?
Because in the minus of picture, at a given level, right, you have states with arbitrarily positive host number but not arbitrary negative host number. Right? Because you create this infinite degeneracy on the minus of picture vacuum. You can take some other operator routine level of a given conformal dimension and you can create infinite number of states on this, but those are created by gamma 0, which increases the host number or decreases the host number.
So irrespective of whatever negative host number O tilde I have after a while.
Exactly. After a while, this is large and positive and this is large and negative. Okay. So there is no way there is a candidate state that you can write down for this on this vacuum. Right? So what happens if you go to higher and higher L0, right, then the number of states keep growing. Typically. But at a given L0 eigenvalue, okay, you only have a finite number of states that are propagate.
But if also there are no such things, how does this thing vanish? I mean, this
Which thing?
This-
Because that means the chi0 acting on this will be 0. See, if there is no candidate state, right, then chi0 must annihilate this state.
Sir, I'm really sorry to disturb you, but we have a...
Yeah, talk and take that piano, yeah. So you are done. So I think that's about the end of the lecture.
I really apologize.
No problem. Yeah. Is that fine? Okay, so next time we'll start with the discussion of singularity.